Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has reignited his call for a reassessment of EU sanctions on Russian energy, arguing that they keep fuel prices high and harm the bloc's competitiveness. While much of Europe has worked to reduce dependence on Russian oil and gas, Hungary remains heavily reliant. The debate over sanctions highlights the tension between economic pressures and political resolve. Joining us today on TVP World to unpack these complexity is Sergey Vakulenko, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Good evening. Glad to be here.
So can you help us understand what are some of Viktor Orbán's main argument against the current EU sanctions on Russian energy, and how valid is that perspective?
I guess his opinion is that Europe decided not to buy or severely limit the amount of oil and gas it buys from Russia. I might guess that his point is Russia just shrugged its shoulders, is selling to India and China, so it doesn't really punish Russia that much. At the same time, Europe has to buy its oil and gas from other sources, which is substantially more expensive, which kills European competitiveness for some key sectors. Energy cost is an input to pretty much every economic activity, but in particular in areas like steel and aluminum making, indirectly car making, glass making, construction materials, fertilizer, chemical industries, and such. In squarely economic sense, this is probably a fair argument. So, indeed, if Europe would forget about sanctions and would continue to buy Russian oil and gas, energy costs for Europe would be lower.
Right, but this is not purely an economic argument, right? There's also the political will to sanction Russia. In the first place, it is seen as a double-edged sword in order to impact the Russian economy. Now, while Hungary remains heavily reliant on Russian energy imports, do you think that it is possible for Europe to stave away from the dependency of Russian oil without it hurting the competitiveness that much? And how important is it to kind of balance the need for economic growth and properly sanctioning Russia to stop its war coffers?
We have to look at the situation on country by country basis. For example, if you look at Hungary and Slovakia, it would be difficult for these countries, and Czechia to a less extent, it would be difficult to these countries to replace Russian oil because they currently receive it by pipeline. These are landlocked countries. They do not get their oil by tankers from wherever, Gulf of Mexico, Persian Gulf, and like, that are tied to Russia. There are competing pipelines coming to these countries from Adriatic Sea, but capacity in that pipelines is limited and the cost would be higher. So if Duna refinery in Hungary and Hungarian-owned refinery in Slovakia and Orlen-owned refineries in Czech Republic would have to absolutely replace that oil by other sources, A, most likely they wouldn't fill their refineries altogether, and B, the costs would be higher, so their oil products would be uncompetitive. Those refineries might have to shut down. When it comes to gas, Hungary enjoys gas coming from South Stream, from Turkey, Bulgaria, Serbia, and then in Hungary, at a friendly price, should we put it this way. So this is a special negotiated price at a different price formula than many other European countries receive it. On the other hand, there is a case in hand of Austria. Austria also kept receiving Russian gas until 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. There was a dispute between OMV, Austrian gas company, and Gazprom for the troubles OMV had in 2022 when Gazprom was curtailing its gas supplies. OMV was a victim of that as well. So OMV won an arbitrage decision in its favor to the clip of 213 million euros. Monthly bill from Gazprom to OMV is a very similar amount, 230. So OMV told Gazprom, we are holding back to the amount, we just pay you the difference, but please provide us with the usual full amount of gas. Well, Gazprom response was either payment of in full or no gas. So there was a telegram this morning that there will be no gas from Gazprom to Austria. So sometimes it could be a bit dangerous as well.
Right, like you mentioned, a lot of the country have their different relation when it comes to the use of and dependency of Russian energy. Now, while a lot of the European Union does criticize Hungary for not sanctioning Russia, or at least not endorsing the sanction of Russia, is there any other incentive that can maybe help alleviate some of the economic pressure of Hungary if it does indeed decide to stay away from Russia, further incentivizing Hungary to be more on board with the sanctions?
I think economically it would be really hard to find an incentive unless EU would be willing to break its own fundamental rules and really start to favor Hungary in many cases, which would run just across European anti-competition authorities and like. So I don't see it likely. And I don't think that buying Hungarian favors is a proper policy decision.
Right. And now with the U.S. having this new presidential election and Trump getting into office, one of the things that he promised is that once he gets into office, day one, they will drill, baby, drill. With the new possibility of U.S. energy flooding the market, do you think that it will be more feasible for the countries in Europe here to perhaps enact some of these sanctions, seeing that perhaps the gas price, energy price will go down slightly, alleviating some of that stress?
Oh, that's a really interesting situation. Trump promises to drill a lot. Problem is that US oil production is a relatively high cost base. A difference between US and most of all the other countries in the world is that government take from oil in the US is quite low. So in other countries, if the government would like to incentivize increased oil production, they might forego their share of economic rent, mineral extraction rent. In the US, the government has foregone its economic rent altogether. Oil is produced either on private land or on federal land, but at extremely low lease rates. So Trump cannot make American oil producers produce more by giving them more money. Most he can do is just to lower the general income tax on those companies, but that's again a rather difficult measure to push through Congress. But then US oil production cost, as I said, is quite high. So US oil production could go higher with more land provided to the oil companies, with more permissions given, with easing the licensing procedures and so on. But the fundamental fact is that it is an expensive oil to provide, an expensive oil to produce. So this is either or. Either drill, baby, drill, but at high prices like $80 a barrel or higher. But if the prices go below 70, US oil production stays flat at best. If it goes below 60, it starts to go down by about 1 million barrels per year. So there's a bit of a contradiction in terms in there. On the other hand, if you're talking on the gas side of the story, US gas exports are predestined to go higher in 2026, 2027, when new trains and whole new LNG plants that are being built in the US as we speak will go online. And yes, there will be very substantial supply of US LNG in the market and Qatari LNG, and it would be easier for Europe to forego Russian gas altogether. Still, that gas, would be higher in price than Russian gas. Pipeline gas is cheaper. When Russian gas is being sold in Europe on hub-linked pricing formulae, it is connected to LNG price as well. It's connected to the predominant European gas prices. But still, cost base for Russian gas is always cheaper. Right, it would always be cheaper to buy Russian gas.
So it does really seem like it is very hard to stay away from the reliance on the Russian energy. I mean, unfortunately, we are running a little bit out of time, but thank you so much for your input and insight and helping us break down this situation from an economic perspective. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
And thank you for watching this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.